Battlefield 2042 has been out for early access, people who pre-ordered gold and ultimate editions of the game for 4 days. And in that 4-day period, I have been cranking out this video. So I've been spending as much time as I possibly can with this game in each of the platforms, and I want to show you some of my findings as well as talk a bit about my personal experiences with the game on each of these platforms. So let's hop right in. Welcome to Uplink. But before we do, definitely do consider checking out our podcast, the podcast myself and Sammy Boy do each week, called The Battlefield Show. And the live show will be this Friday, the world release for Battlefield 2042 at 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Come join us. It's going to be a blast. Talk a bit about our experiences in Battlefield 2042. Okay, Battlefield 2042 has had quite an interesting launch. I always knew it was going to be either fantastic or completely terrible or across the board. There wasn't going to be a mediocre release for this game. There's too much hype. There's too much excitement. Everything is all around this game in terms of Battlefield fans, or even Call of Duty fans, if I'm going to be honest there. After the cancellation of Battlefront 2 and Battlefield 5 to focus on Battlefield 6, that we called it at the point, this game has had everyone's eyes on it. So far, PC has had quite a bit of issues, especially in terms of performance. It seemed heavily CPU bound, though most recently they had a driver update for NVIDIA graphics cards that should help a little bit of getting that performance back. PC has definitely been the hardest. Console, at least on next gen, has been very solid for me, though it has been going a little bit downhill considering how many people are on those servers now, but still marketably better than PC. And then I think the big question that a lot of people have is, how does it perform on last gen, especially after the terrible release of Cyberpunk 2077? And I mean, that really set the standard of, okay, this game was made somewhat for last gen, but it did not perform, and it ultimately got switched to focus on the Pro and One X version of Xbox and the next gen. But it never really took into account of the previous gen. And that was a big question I had too. Battlefield 2042 on last gen is 27 gigs, so it's not a huge download for the size of the game. I thought Battlefield 2042 honestly was going to be around 100 gigs, especially considering something like Warzone is how big now? 200 gigs. I re-downloaded Call of Duty Cold War because I wanted to play some zombies with some friends, and that game was 250 gigs to download, which is mind-blowing. It's crazy to think about. That half of 500 gigs. If you have a 500 gig hard drive, it is going to take up half of it. It's crazy to think about. But how well does it perform? I have sunk in about, at the time of this recording, about 5 hours on PC. I've sunk in around 5 hours on console in terms of this Xbox Series X, and I've sunk in about 2 hours on the last gen version of the game. And I have thoughts on each of these. So in terms of PC, my PC is it's got an 850 watt power supply. It's got a 3080 Ti RTX Founder Editions card, and it also has an AMD Ryzen 9 5950X. There it is. So complicated, all the numbers. And I was also booting this off of an SSD that I have in my rig that is in a M.2 slot. So I have a very beefy PC. It's all being cooled by an AIO and then air cooling for the graphics card. Almost as high of an end of a PC as you can get. And even I was struggling at times, especially with frame drops. It was not very consistent, and if something was happening on the screen, by golly, was I losing a lot of frames. There were moments in very close quarters, especially on Breakthrough, that mode with all those peoples on that point, it was struggling, which it should not be struggling on a PC of this caliber. It just seems very poorly optimized, and I think that's ultimately why it was the last to release for the early access people. And in terms of like the trial on EA Play or Game Pass Ultimate, you had to wait for the PC version, and I think that was ultimately a strategy as they worked more on cleaning things up for the PC. Ultimately, it didn't work overly well. Series X was solid. I was able to play a day early on Series X, and I streamed it on the channel, and I had a fantastic time. I have yet to experience heavy frame drops. I think of those 5 hours I've played on the Series X, I have maybe had one time where it dropped noticeably. And that was, again, in those moments where it was heavy action, explosions going on, everything like that. So that's kind of understandable. Anything like that. I've been playing on a 4K TV, 60 FPS. It's been locked at that consistently. And again, I have yet to notice any heavy performance issues. And then we get to the last gen console. And I think this is ultimately where we see, ew. Okay, this game, I was running it on an Xbox One S. So it wasn't the base model, it was the Xbox One S. And it was on a 1080p monitor. All of the recordings that you see were run using the same settings. They were run using the same field of view, and they were played all on the same monitor, as well as the same settings to record it. I recorded all of these on the Elgato HD60S to get a similar baseline in terms of recording. None of the settings were changed in between. They were all played on the same monitor, even the PC. Last gen was rough. It was not as responsive as I would have hoped. It's definitely playable. I would say not as playable as Battlefield 5 was. Battlefield 5 is definitely a better game to play on last gen than this game. The graphic settings, it was rough. Especially stuff like the smoke on certain maps was very pixelated. It did not look very well while playing it. And it was noticeable, like going through and switching in between the 1S and the Series X was noticeable. It felt like a bigger jump from last gen to new gen. Like it felt like the jump from like Xbox 360 to Xbox One. Honestly, it was that level of kind of like, man, yeah, this is noticeable. The foliage was very low res. Everything had this very low res feel to it, and something that I think the game does a great job of is on next gen, on that Series X, it feels and plays like a next gen game. Everything's very responsive, everything feels nice, and it's got that next gen sheen to it. But it does not really reflect that on the last gen. So I would say I did appreciate on last gen the 64 player. The smaller map was great. I loved playing on the smaller map. It was so awesome to hop on and get the experience of that core experience, because you feel like there are people everywhere. It's great, and that's something that I did not, especially on PC, and even Series X. It did not feel like very populated maps. While the last gen version, it felt so fun. Everyone was everywhere. It was great to play, and it was great to have that experience that you're used to in Battlefield. There wasn't a whole lot of running. Everything was nicely spaced in between each other, but that's not really the case on the next gen or the PC. A question I've been getting a lot on stream as I'm playing the game has been, do I buy this game now or do I wait? Personally, if you are on last gen, I would wait. Hopefully it does get better. If you're playing on console, I think it's perfectly fine to hop on and play. If it looks fun to you, you are probably going to greatly enjoy it. But if you're on PC, it's a toss-up. Depending on your rig, I would wait. Honestly, maybe even not depending on your rig, because I've got a beast setup and I still struggle sometimes with the heavy moments. Again, I am running it on Ultra, so that may be the case, but I did try it running on medium graphics and it was the same thing. So definitely more CPU bound, and that's saying something considering I have the Ryzen 950, 950X. But ultimately, I would say maybe wait till a couple more patches come in before you get this game. And just be supportive. If you find any bugs, let people know in the proper channels. Don't attack the the developers on Twitter, as that will make them less likely to fix those things. So definitely stay tuned for more content on this channel, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, definitely hit subscribe and let me know down below what your thoughts are on the differences between these versions and if you'll be picking it up. Thank you all, and I'll see you on the battlefield.